3 years of marriage, but Christian barely came home anymore. The silence had become louder than any argument. When Gabriella saw the photo of him with his ex at a cafe in Chicago, something inside her finally broke. She waited for him that rainy night, divorce papers in hand, her voice steady as steel. "Do you still love me?" His hesitation was the only answer she needed. But when she left, Christian realized he had lost the only thing that truly mattered. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, click the super thanks button too. Your support makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing you stories that move you. The house was too big for two people who barely spoke to each other. Gabriella stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. Cold, beautiful, unreachable. Exactly like Christian had become. 3 years. 3 years since they exchanged vows under a canopy of white roses, promising forever with tears in their eyes and hope in their hearts. Now, forever seemed like an empty word echoing through marble hallways and unused rooms. She ran her fingers across the cold surface of the dining table, that same table where they used to share meals, laughter, and plans for the future. Now, only one place setting waited every night. The other remained empty, untouched, like a silent reminder of everything that had been lost between them. Christian was traveling again. Or maybe he wasn't. She'd stopped asking. His messages were short, functional, stripped of the tenderness that had once made her fall in love. Meeting running late. Don't wait up. As if she still waited for him. As if he still cared whether she did. Gabriella walked to the bedroom, her bare feet silent against the cold hardwood floor. The bed seemed enormous without him, a vast ocean of Egyptian cotton sheets and untouched pillows. She remembered when they couldn't keep their hands off each other, when every night was a discovery, every touch a promise. Now even when he was home, Christian slept turned to his side, his back to her, building an invisible wall she didn't know how to tear down. She sat on the edge of the bed, picking up a framed photograph from the nightstand. It was from their wedding day. Christian held her by the waist, looking at her as if she were the only person in the world. That look, intense, passionate, completely hers. When was the last time he looked at her like that? When was the last time he truly saw her? The sound of her phone buzzing pulled her from the memory. An Instagram notification. She almost ignored it, but something made her tap the screen. It was a post from Claire, a mutual acquaintance, someone peripheral in their lives, someone who posted too much and noticed even more. And then Gabriella saw it. Christian. In a cafe she didn't recognize. Chicago, the location tag said. He was sitting across from someone, a woman with long reddish-brown hair, delicate features, and a smile that seemed far too familiar. Gabriella's heart stopped. She knew that face. Rebecca, his ex-girlfriend. The one he'd dated for 2 years before meeting her. The one he swore was ancient history. It wasn't an intimate photo. There were no kisses, hugs, or intertwined hands. But there was something worse. Ease. He was leaning forward, smiling in that way he used to smile at her. Rebecca was laughing, her hand delicately resting on the table too close to his. And the most painful part of all, he hadn't mentioned anything. Not a word. Not an explanation. Gabriella felt the air leave her lungs. Her fingers trembled as she zoomed in on the image, searching for something, anything, that would make this make sense. But there was nothing. Just Christian, looking more alive in that single photograph than he'd seemed at home in months. Rain began to fall outside, heavy drops pounding against the windows like tears the sky was crying on her behalf. She set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter. As if she might shatter. How long had this been going on? Was this why he was always traveling? Always unavailable? Always somewhere else, but never here? Never with her? She stood up, moving through the house like a ghost. Every room was a memory that now felt poisoned. The kitchen where he used to make her coffee on Sunday mornings. The living room where they watched movies curled up on the couch. The closet where their clothes still hung side by side, pretending an intimacy that no longer existed. Gabriella found herself in his office, a space she rarely entered anymore, The desk was impeccably organized, files stacked with precision, laptop closed. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. But her hand moved on its own, opening the drawer. Inside, hidden beneath a stack of business cards, was a small velvet box. Her breath caught. She opened it slowly, revealing a delicate bracelet, silver, with a small, star-shaped pendant. It wasn't hers. She'd never seen it before. Was it for Rebecca? Was he planning to give it to her? Or had he already given something similar? The pain was physical now, a sharp, twisted thing in her chest that made it hard to breathe. Gabriella closed the box and placed it back exactly where she'd found it. She wouldn't confront him about snooping. She wouldn't give him that excuse, no. She would wait. She would ask directly, face to face, with the clarity that came from finally seeing the truth. And she would do it with the only thing she still had, her dignity. Gabriella walked to the home office she'd converted into her art studio, the only space in that house that was entirely hers. She pulled a folder from the filing cabinet, one she'd been avoiding for months. Inside were documents she'd asked her lawyer to prepare weeks ago, when she first began to suspect their marriage was becoming nothing more than a comfortable lie. Divorce papers. Her hands trembled as she held them. This was real. This was the end of everything they'd built, everything they'd promised. But what was the alternative? Keep living in this beautiful hollow shell of a marriage? Keep pretending that his absence wasn't slowly killing her every single day? The rain outside intensified, thunder rumbling in the distance like the storm forming inside her heart. Gabriella placed the papers on the dining table, right on Christian's side. And then she waited. Because if there was one thing she'd learned in these 3 years of silent marriage, it was this. Love doesn't die screaming. It dies in whispers, in lonely dinners, in cold beds, in hidden photographs, and in questions no one has the courage to ask. Until now. That night, when Christian came home, if he came home, Gabriella would finally ask the question that had been suffocating her for months. Do you still love me? And whatever his answer, she already knew what she had to do. Rain pounded against the windows when Gabriella heard the front door open. It was almost midnight. She sat in the dim living room, only the soft light from a lamp illuminating her face. The divorce papers were carefully arranged on the coffee table, like cards from a game she no longer wanted to play. Christian walked in shaking off his wet coat, dark hair plastered to his forehead, water droplets running down the sculpted face she once loved waking up beside. He looked tired, not just physically, but in a deeper way, as if carrying the weight of something he never shared with her. When he saw her sitting there, he stopped. His eyes, those brown eyes that used to light up when they saw her, blinked in confusion. Gab? Why are you still up? His voice was hoarse, surprised, as if her presence in her own home was something unexpected. She didn't answer immediately, just watched him remove his shoes, loosen his tie, moving through the house with the familiarity of someone who lives there, but the distance of someone who's never truly present. Sit down, she said, her voice too calm, too controlled. We need to talk. Christian frowned but obeyed, sitting in the armchair across from her. There were meters of distance between them, but it felt like a chasm. He glanced at the documents on the table but didn't pick them up. Not yet. What is this? He asked, though the answer was already clear in her eyes. Gabriella took a deep breath, feeling her heart pound against her ribs. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers interlaced so tightly her knuckles turned white. Christian, do you still love me? The question hung in the air between them like glass about to shatter. He stared at her, lips parting as if to answer, but no sound came out. The hesitation lasted only a few seconds, but they were seconds that said everything. What? Gabriella, why are you asking me this? He leaned forward, running his hands through his wet hair. Of course I love you. We're married. Being married isn't the same as loving, she replied, and her voice trembled for the first time. You barely come home, Christian. When you do, you act like I'm just part of the furniture. We don't talk, we don't touch, we don't exist anymore. He opened his mouth to protest, but she raised her hand, silencing him. I saw a photo of you, she continued, picking up her phone and showing him the screen. In Chicago, with Rebecca. His face paled. It was subtle, but she knew every micro-expression of this man, or at least she used to. He looked at the image and then at her, jaw tense. "Gab, it's not what you think." "And what am I thinking, Christian?" Her voice rose, breaking the veneer of calm she'd maintained until now. "Because I don't know what to think anymore. You don't tell me anything. You disappear for days. And now I find out you're meeting up with your ex and didn't even bother to mention it? It was just coffee." He stood abruptly, frustration exploding. "She was in town for work. We ran into each other and talked. That's it. Then why didn't you tell me?" Gabriella also stood facing him. If it was so innocent, why hide it? He fell silent, breathing heavily, fists clenched at his sides. And in that silence, Gabriella felt something inside her finally break. "You know what the problem is, Christian? It's not even the coffee with her. It's that I can't remember the last time you looked at me the way you're looking now, with emotion, with anything." Tears began sliding down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. "You're more alive right now, fighting with me than you've been in the last 6 months of our marriage." Christian took a step toward her, reaching out his hand, but Gabriella stepped back. "No," she whispered. "Don't do that. Don't touch me now just because you're scared of losing me. I needed those touches when you were here and chose to stay away. Gabriella, please." His voice was broken now, hoarse with an emotion she hadn't seen in a long time. "I didn't want it to come to this. Work has always been intense," she interrupted. "But before, you made a point of coming back. You'd call me in the middle of the day just to hear my voice. You'd leave notes on the fridge. You made me feel like I mattered more than any meeting, any trip, anything else." She pointed to the papers on the table. "When did that change, Christian? When did I stop being your priority?" He looked at the documents as if seeing a ghost. He walked slowly to the table and picked up one of the papers with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the printed words, "Petition for divorce," and something in him seemed to crumble. "Are you serious?" His voice was a whisper now, almost inaudible beneath the sound of the rain. "You want to end this?" "I don't want to," Gabriella answered, and it was the most honest truth she'd spoken in months. "But I can't keep going like this. I can't keep feeling invisible in my own life. I can't keep sleeping alone in a bed that should be ours. I can't keep waiting for a man who clearly doesn't want to be here anymore. I do want to be here." He threw the papers back on the table, his voice echoing through the room. "Gabriella, I never wanted anything but to be with you. Then where were you?" She practically shouted, all the pent-up emotions finally overflowing. "Where were you when I needed you? When I waited for you? When I begged, even if silently, for you to see me again?" Christian stood there, hands trembling, chest rising and falling rapidly. Tears glistened in his eyes, tears she hadn't seen since the day they lost his grandfather. And suddenly, all the anger, all the frustration seemed to evaporate, leaving only the raw pain between them. "I don't know how to fix this," he finally admitted, voice breaking. "I don't know how to be the man you deserve again." Gabriella felt her heart squeeze painfully. Part of her wanted to cross the room, hold him, say they'd find a way. But the stronger part, the part that had spent months bleeding in silence, knew that words weren't enough. "Then maybe it's time you figured it out," she said softly. "But not with me waiting on the other side. Not anymore." She grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. Christian followed, desperate. "Gabriella, wait. Where are you going?" She paused at the door, glancing over her shoulder. He stood there, completely destroyed, and part of her felt a stabbing pain seeing him like this. But it was too late. "I don't know, Christian, but I need to go somewhere where I'm not just a shadow in my own life." And then she walked out the door, leaving behind the man she loved, the house they'd built together, and the broken pieces of what was once the most beautiful love she'd ever known. The rain soaked her in seconds, but Gabriella didn't even feel it, because for the first time in a long while, she was feeling something other than empty. She was feeling free. The Brooklyn loft was everything the Manhattan penthouse wasn't. Small, cozy, filled with natural light. Gabriella moved in 3 days after that rainy night, taking only the essentials: clothes, some books, art supplies, and the wedding photograph that, for some masochistic reason, she couldn't leave behind. The first mornings were the hardest, waking up in a strange place, without the familiar weight of his body beside her, even though that body had been absent for months. It was like learning to breathe again, each inhale painful, each exhale a reminder of everything she'd lost. But gradually, the apartment began to come alive. She hung light curtains that danced with the breeze from the open window. She organized her brushes and canvases in a sunny corner. She bought fresh flowers from the market on the corner, yellow tulips that looked like little suns scattered around the room. And slowly, very slowly, Gabriella began to remember who she was before becoming Christian Hale's invisible wife. She signed up for watercolor classes at a nearby gallery, something she'd always wanted to do but never had the courage. She met people, women who laughed loudly, who shared stories of broken hearts and fresh starts, who didn't judge her for walking away from a marriage everyone thought was perfect. On Saturday afternoons, she walked through Prospect Park, watching couples holding hands, families laughing, children running after kites. And though part of her felt a pang of envy, another part, a new and fragile part, felt grateful for having had the courage to leave. But the nights were still his. Gabriella would lie in the new bed, smaller, simpler, and her body would instinctively curve toward the empty side. How many times had she slept like this in the penthouse? How many nights had her body searched for his, only to find cold space and silent abandonment? She'd pick up her phone, scroll to his name in her contacts, her finger hovering over the call button. But she never called. What would she say? That she missed him? That she still loved him? That she woke up in the middle of the night with the ghost of him beside her? Christian didn't reach out. No messages. No calls. Just silence. The same silence that had destroyed them. And Gabriella didn't know if that relieved her or shattered her even more. On the other side of town, in the penthouse that now felt like a mausoleum, Christian Hale was falling apart. He'd thought he'd be able to continue, that he'd return to his usual routine, work, meetings, travel, and that the pain would eventually fade, like everything in life. But Gabriella wasn't something that faded. She was in every corner of that house. She was in the kitchen, where he could still see her dancing barefoot while making breakfast, humming softly to that song she could never remember the name of. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book, feet tucked under her body, a strand of hair falling across her face. She was in the bedroom wearing that t-shirt of his she'd steal, the fabric too big on her body, but perfect in a way he could never explain. Christian tried to sleep in the bed they'd shared for 3 years, but every night he woke up suffocating, searching for her in the dark. He ended up migrating to the guest room, but even there, her scent seemed to haunt him, lavender and vanilla, the fragrance of the shampoo she used. He threw himself into work with an intensity that even his partners found concerning. 16 hours a day at the office. Entire weekends locked in meetings. Anything to avoid thinking, to avoid feeling, to avoid admitting he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. But there were moments, small and devastating, when reality hit him like a runaway train. Like when he made coffee and automatically grabbed 2 cups before remembering she wasn't there anymore. Like when he saw a couple laughing in a store and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd made Gabriella laugh like that. Like when he found one of her earrings under the bed and held it in his palm until the metal warmed to his body temperature. Christian didn't know where she was living. He didn't have the courage to ask. Part of him imagined that if he found out, he'd show up at her door, begging for forgiveness. But he didn't deserve forgiveness. He knew that. One night, he opened her closet, the one she hadn't completely emptied. Some dresses still hung there, silent witnesses to a shared life. He grabbed one, that navy blue one she wore on their anniversary, and pressed the fabric against his face. It still smelled like her. And Christian Hale, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, a man who commanded boardrooms with unwavering authority, broke down. He fell to his knees on the closet floor, the dress pressed against his chest, and cried like he hadn't cried since childhood. He'd lost her. Really lost her. And the worst part was that he couldn't blame anyone but himself. Gabriella had been right. He'd stopped prioritizing her. He'd convinced himself that love was something static, that once won, it would remain forever. He hadn't realized that love was like a plant. It needed to be watered, tended, nurtured, and he'd let theirs die of thirst. Christian finally stood up, put the dress back with reverent care, and walked to the living room. The divorce papers were still on the table, untouched since that night. He picked them up with trembling hands and read every word, every clause, every line that would officially end what they'd built. But he didn't sign. Not yet. Because something inside him, a stubborn spark of hope or maybe just desperation, refused to accept that this was the end. That everything they'd lived, everything they'd meant to each other could be reduced to signatures on legal documents. Christian grabbed his phone and opened his photos. He scrolled until he found the ones he'd never shown anyone. Private, intimate moments. Gabriella laughing with ice cream on her nose. Gabriella sleeping on the couch, bathed in golden afternoon light. Gabriella looking at him with that smile that said, "I love you," without needing words. How had he been so stupid? How had he let this slip through his fingers? He stopped on a specific photo. Their wedding day. She was turning to look at him over her shoulder, the white dress billowing, a radiant smile on her face. And he was looking at her as if she were everything. Because she was. And maybe she still was. Christian took a deep breath, making a decision he should have made months ago. He didn't know if he could win her back. He didn't know if she still wanted him, if there was anything left between them besides hurt and resentment. But he had to try. Because a life without Gabriella wasn't life. It was just existence. And Christian Hale was tired of just existing. The invitation arrived in a thick paper envelope, embossed gold letters announcing the Hartley Foundation's annual charity event, a gala that brought together New York's elite to raise funds for underprivileged children. Gabriella stared at the invitation for long minutes, her finger tracing the embossed letters. She and Christian used to go together every year. It was tradition. He'd wear a black tuxedo, she'd wear an evening gown, and they'd spend the night circulating through superficial conversations and expensive auctions, but always finding moments to touch each other. His hand on the curve of her back, fingers intertwined under the table, knowing glances when someone said something particularly pretentious. Now, the idea of going alone felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying. But Sarah, her friend from watercolor class, convinced her. "You can't hide forever, Gab. Besides, you're going to look stunning. He'll regret every second he spent away from you." Gabriella wasn't sure she wanted Christian to regret anything. Actually, she wasn't sure what she wanted, but she decided to go anyway. The dress was new, black, fitted, with a neckline that revealed the delicate curve of her shoulders and a slit on the side that showed her leg when she walked. She let her hair fall in soft waves down her back, applied dark red lipstick, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was different from the one who'd left the penthouse weeks ago. There was a strength in her eyes now, a determination that came from having survived her own pain. The Plaza Hotel ballroom was transformed into a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring ceiling, casting cascades of light over guests dressed in their finest. An orchestra played softly in the corner, classical music floating through the air along with the clink of champagne glasses and polite laughter. Gabriella entered alone, accepting a champagne flute from a passing waiter. She greeted some familiar faces, exchanged smiles and empty pleasantries, and tried not to search for him in the crowd. But then she saw him. Christian stood on the other side of the ballroom, surrounded by a small group of businessmen. He wore a black tuxedo, the same one he wore every year, tailored to perfectly fit his broad shoulders and narrow waist. His hair was impeccably slicked back, beard trimmed with precision. He looked tired, she noticed. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. As if feeling the weight of her gaze, Christian turned his head. Their eyes met across the crowded room. And for a moment, everything else disappeared. There was no music, no people, no glittering lights. Just the two of them, separated by meters that felt like miles, caught in a look that said everything neither had the courage to verbalize. Something passed across his face. Surprise, pain, desire, regret, all at once. He excused himself from the people around him and began walking toward her. Gabriella felt her heart race. Every step he took seemed to echo in her chest. She wanted to run, wanted to stay, wanted to disappear, and at the same time wanted him to get there faster. When Christian finally stopped in front of her, the world seemed muted. "Gabriella," he said, and there was so much in the way he pronounced her name. Reverence, longing, desperation. "Christian," she replied, and hated how her voice trembled. He looked her up and down, slowly, as if memorizing every detail. His eyes stopped at her neckline, the curve of her hip accentuated by the dress, the long legs revealed by the side slit. When he finally looked back at her face, there was fire in his brown eyes. "You look," he began, voice hoarse. "You look stunning, Gab." She took a sip of champagne, needing something to do with her hands, to keep herself steady. "Don't say that now," she replied, but there was no anger in her voice, only weariness. "Why not?" He took a step closer, and Gabriella could smell his cologne, woody, with notes of cedar and something uniquely his. A scent she knew better than her own. "It's the truth. The truth, Christian, is that you had months to tell me these things, years, and you chose not to." He lowered his gaze, jaw tense. When he looked back at her, there were unshed tears in his eyes. I know I ruined everything, but, Gab, you don't leave my mind. Not for a second. Don't do this," she whispered, feeling her own defenses begin to crack. "Not now. Not here. Then when?" His voice was urgent now, desperate. "You don't answer my calls. You don't respond to my messages. I don't know where you're living. I don't know anything about you anymore." "And whose fault is that?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "You didn't know anything about me when we were still married, Christian. Why should I make it easier now?" He recoiled as if he'd been slapped. But then, instead of pulling away, he did something unexpected. He took her hand, that hand he hadn't touched in so long, and held it with a gentleness that made Gabriella's heart squeeze painfully. "Because I still love you," he said, voice breaking. "Because I wake up every day in a house that's a tomb without you. Because I can't eat, can't sleep, can't breathe right knowing I lost you." Gabriella felt tears burn in her eyes. She wanted to pull her hand back, wanted to maintain the distance she'd built so carefully. But his touch was warm, familiar, and she'd felt so cold these past weeks. "You didn't lose me that day, Christian," she said softly. "You lost me on all the nights you chose not to come home, at all the cold dinners, all the times I said, 'I love you,' and you just nodded, distracted. You lost me little by little, and you didn't even notice." "I noticed," he admitted, and a tear finally escaped, running down his face. "I noticed, and I was too much of a coward to admit I was destroying the only good thing in my life." The music changed. A slow waltz began to play, and couples started moving to the dance floor. Christian looked at the floor, then at her. "Dance with me?" he asked, voice hesitant. "Please, just once." Gabriella knew she should say no, knew that dancing with him, being so close to him, would throw months of healing out the window. But her heart, that stubborn heart that still beat his name, wanted to. "Okay," she whispered. "Just once." Christian guided her to the dance floor, his hand firm on her back, the other holding her fingers with a gentleness that contrasted with the urgency in his eyes. When they began to move, their bodies fit together perfectly as they always had. Gabriella closed her eyes, letting herself be carried by the music, by the warmth of his body against hers. His hand on the curve of her back burned through the thin fabric of the dress. She could feel his breath against her hair, uneven, restrained. "I miss you," Christian whispered against her ear, so quietly she almost didn't hear. "I miss everything. The way you sleep curled into me, the way you laugh when you're really happy, the way you look at me like I'm capable of anything. I used to look at you that way because you were capable of anything," she replied, voice trembling. "Until you stopped trying." He pulled her closer, eliminating any space between them. Gabriella could feel his heart beating against her chest, fast and irregular. "Let me try again," he pleaded. "Please, Gab. Let me prove I can be the man you deserve." She opened her eyes and looked at him. There were so many emotions on his face, Love, fear, hope, desperation. It was the face of the man she'd fallen in love with, but also of the man who had broken her. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "I don't know if I can risk it again." The music came to an end, but they remained standing there, caught in each other's gaze. Christian brought his hand to her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a reverence that made Gabriella's breath catch. "Then at least let me show you," he said. "Give me a chance to remind you why we fell in love." And before she could respond, before she could think of the reasons why this was a terrible idea, Christian leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead. A soft, chaste kiss, but so loaded with emotion that Gabriella felt the tears finally fall. When they separated, their fingers almost touched, an almost that contained entire universes of unspoken things. And in that almost, Gabriella realized something terrifying. She still loved him. Maybe she never stopped. 3 days after the gala, Gabriella was in the studio she'd set up in the loft, immersed in a canvas that seemed to refuse to come to life. The colors were wrong, the brushstrokes without emotion. She'd started over 5 times, and each version seemed worse than the last. The truth was, her mind wasn't on the art. It was stuck in that ballroom lit by crystal chandeliers, in that embrace that seemed to last an eternity, and end too soon, in those brown eyes that looked at her as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. Her phone vibrated on the table beside her, making her jump. She looked at the screen and her heart raced when she saw the name. Christian. For a moment she just stared. After weeks of absolute silence, he was calling. Gabriella took a deep breath before answering. "Hello?" "Hi." His voice sounded hesitant, almost nervous. Do you have a minute?" "Depends on what you want to say." There was a pause. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, and somehow, that simple sound made her miss him in a painful way. "I wanted to see you," he finally said. "To talk. Really talk. No interruptions, no other people around. Just the two of us." Gabriella closed her eyes, fighting the urge to say yes immediately. "Christian, I know what you're going to say," he interrupted gently. "That it's a bad idea, that we shouldn't. But Gab, after that night, I can't stop thinking. And I think you can't either." She hated how well he knew her, hated that he was right. "And where do you want us to meet?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Here, at our house." He quickly corrected himself. "At the house, I'll cook. Nothing extravagant, just dinner. Like old times." Gabriella bit her lip, her heart torn between what her head told her to do and what her heart begged for. "Please," Christian said, and there was so much vulnerability in that single word that her defenses began to crumble. "Just dinner. If afterward you want to leave and never talk to me again, I'll respect that. But give me this chance." She should say no. She knew she should, but the part of her that still held hope, that fragile, foolish part that still believed in happy endings, whispered yes. "Okay." She finally agreed. "When?" "Friday night? 7 o'clock? I'll be there." Friday came too quickly. Gabriella got dressed 3 times, changing clothes each time she looked in the mirror. She didn't want to look like she was trying to impress him, but she also didn't want to look careless. She ended up choosing a simple wine-colored dress that hugged her curves subtly and left her hair down. When the Uber dropped her off in front of the penthouse, Gabriella stood on the sidewalk for long minutes, looking at the building she once called home. How many times had she walked through that door with shopping bags, heart light? How many times had she waited eagerly to see Christian after a long day? And how many times had she entered that house feeling completely alone, even knowing he was there? She took a deep breath and went inside. The elevator rose in silence, and when the doors opened on the top floor, Gabriella saw Christian waiting at the apartment door. He wore dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing the defined muscles of his arms. His hair was slightly messy, as if he'd run his hands through it several times. He was nervous. She recognized the signs. "Hi," he said, and the smile that appeared on his face was shy, almost boyish. "Hi," she replied, and suddenly felt like she was on a first date, not returning to the house where she'd lived for years. Christian stepped aside, letting her in. The apartment was exactly as she remembered, but different at the same time. There were fresh flowers, yellow tulips, her favorites, on the entry table. Scented candles were lit throughout the room, casting a soft, golden light. And from the kitchen came a wonderful smell. "You're cooking?" she asked, surprised. "Trying," he admitted with a crooked smile. "Remember how you always said I should learn? So, I learned." Gabriella followed him to the kitchen and stopped at the door, absorbing the scene. The counter was covered with ingredients: fresh tomatoes, basil, garlic, homemade pasta. There was a pot on the stove with something that smelled like tomato sauce, and wine was breathing in glasses she herself had chosen years ago. "You made homemade pasta?" she asked, incredulous. "With help from some YouTube videos and 3 disastrous attempts," he confessed, laughing softly. "But I think this one turned out good." She couldn't help the smile that formed on her lips. There was something incredibly touching about imagining him alone in that kitchen, trying to learn something new, just for her. "Wine?" he offered, picking up the bottle. "Please." Christian poured the glasses carefully, and when he handed one to her, their fingers touched briefly. It was a quick, casual touch, but Gabriella felt electricity run through her entire body. They moved through the kitchen in a strangely natural dance. She chopped the basil while he stirred the sauce. He asked her to taste and adjust the seasoning. She laughed when he almost let the pasta burn because he was distracted looking at her. It was like going back in time to the first months of marriage when cooking together was an adventure, a way to be close to each other. "Remember the first time we tried to make risotto?" Christian asked, smiling at her. "And you added too much wine and it ended up more like soup?" Gabriella laughed, and it was a genuine, light laugh. "We ordered pizza afterward, and ate it in bed watching that Italian movie you loved. Cinema Paradiso. That's the one." He paused, stirring the sauce slowly. "You cried at the end." "I always cry at the end of that movie." Christian looked at her, and there was something in his eyes, tenderness mixed with sadness. "I miss that," he said softly. "I miss making you laugh, seeing you cry at silly movies, being close to you doing simple things like cooking." Gabriella felt her chest tighten. She put the knife aside and turned to face him. "Christian, what are we doing here?" He turned off the stove and turned completely toward her, eliminating the distance between them until they were only centimeters apart. "We're trying," he answered. "We're trying to remember why we fell in love, why we promised forever. And if what we had doesn't exist anymore, then at least we tried." He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he gently touched her face. "But I don't believe that, Gab. I saw the way you looked at me at the gala. I felt the way you trembled when we danced. That's not just memory, it's still here." Gabriella closed her eyes, leaning into his touch without meaning to. It had been so long since he'd touched her with this intention, with this gentleness. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Me too." He pressed his forehead against hers, breathing in the same rhythm as her. "But maybe we need to be scared together." They stayed like that for long moments, just breathing the same air, feeling the warmth of each other's bodies. When Gabriella finally opened her eyes, she found his already watching her. "Dinner's going to get cold," she whispered. "Let it get cold," he replied, and there was intensity in his voice. "You're here. That's all that matters." Christian ran his thumb across her cheek, tracing a line to the corner of her lips. His eyes fell to her mouth, and Gabriella felt her breath catch. "Can I?" he started, but didn't finish the question. She knew what he was asking, and she knew that if she said yes, she'd be opening a door she'd locked so carefully. But in that moment, with his warmth so close, with the smell of tomato sauce and wine in the air, with memories of everything they'd been dancing around them, Gabriella didn't want to keep that door closed anymore. "Yes," she whispered, and then Christian leaned in, closing the centimeters that separated them, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss started soft, almost reverent, as if he were memorizing her taste again. But when Gabriella sighed against his mouth and placed her hands on his chest, feeling his racing heart beneath her palms, something changed. The kiss deepened. His hand slid to the nape of her neck, fingers intertwining in the soft strands of her hair. His other hand went to her waist, pulling her closer, eliminating any space between their bodies. Gabriella felt herself melt against him, into his warmth, into the way he kissed her, as if she were air and he was drowning. Her hands moved up his chest over his shoulders until they found the nape of his neck, pulling him closer, deeper. When they finally separated, both were breathless, foreheads still together, hearts beating out of sync. "Gab," Christian whispered, voice hoarse. Don't talk," she interrupted, eyes still closed. "Just stay like this with me. Just a little longer." And he stayed, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, as if he were afraid she'd disappear if he let go. And maybe she would, but for now, in that moment, they were together, and that was enough. Dinner was a mix of nervous laughter and silences loaded with meaning. They sat at the table, that same table where Gabriella had dined alone so many times. But now there was life there. There was conversation. There were looks that said more than words ever could. Christian talked about the cooking classes he'd started taking. Gabriella spoke about the watercolors she was painting, about the people she'd met in Brooklyn, about how she'd rediscovered small pleasures she'd forgotten, like walking without a destination or drinking coffee while watching the sunrise. "You seem different," Christian said, watching her over his wineglass. "Lighter somehow." "I had to learn to be happy alone," she replied, and there was no accusation in her voice, only truth. "Because waiting for someone else to make me happy was destroying me." He lowered his gaze, jaw tense. "I know, and I hate that it took you leaving for me to realize how much I was hurting you." Gabriella reached her hand across the table, lightly touching his fingers. "Sometimes we need to lose ourselves to find ourselves again," she said softly. Christian turned his palm up, intertwining his fingers with hers, and they stayed like that for long moments, just feeling the connection that still existed. Fragile, but real. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Christian put on some music, soft jazz he knew she loved, and sat on the couch. Gabriella hesitated only a second before sitting beside him, not as close as they used to be, but close enough to feel the warmth of his body. "I started therapy," Christian said suddenly, looking at his own hands. "After you left. The therapist made me realize a lot of things I was ignoring." "Like what?" Gabriella asked, turning slightly to face him. "Like the fact that I was using work to run away," he admitted, finally looking at her. "Not from you, but from myself, from the fear of not being enough, of disappointing people, of disappointing you." Gabriella felt her heart squeeze. "Christian, you never—" "I know it sounds ridiculous," he interrupted. "I have a successful company, money, recognition, but none of that meant anything when I came home and saw the way you looked at me, like I was a stranger, like you were giving up on us." "I was," she admitted, and saw the pain cross his face. "But not because you weren't enough, Christian. It was because I felt invisible, and invisibility hurts more than anything else." He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "I was an idiot." "You were absent," she corrected. "There's a difference." Christian looked at her intensely, brown eyes shining with emotion. "Let me be present now," he said, voice low and urgent. "Let me show you that I've learned, that I've changed." Gabriella felt tears burn in her eyes. "And if it's not enough? What if we're already too broken to fix?" In response, Christian slid closer, completely eliminating the distance between them on the couch. He took her hand and placed it on his own chest right over his racing heart. "Do you feel this?" he asked. "My heart still races when you're near, still speeds up when you smile, still aches when you cry. If this isn't love, if this isn't something worth fighting for, then I don't know what is." A tear ran down Gabriella's face, and Christian wiped it away with his thumb, the touch so gentle that she closed her eyes, leaning into it. "I'm so afraid of getting hurt again," she whispered. "Me too," he admitted. "I'm afraid of disappointing you, of not being able to be the man you need, but Gab, I'd rather try and fail than never have you in my life again." He leaned closer, lips centimeters from hers. "Can I just look at you for one more second?" he whispered, echoing the same words he'd said at the gala. Gabriella opened her eyes and found his. So close she could see the golden flecks in his brown irises, the small laugh lines around his eyes that she'd always loved. You can do more than look, she whispered back. And that was all he needed to hear. Christian kissed her again, but this time it was different. There was urgency there, need, as if they'd been deprived of each other for years instead of weeks. His mouth explored hers with a hunger that made Gabriella moan softly. Her hands went to his hair, pulling, while his slid down her back, along the curve of her waist, pulling her closer until she was practically in his lap. Gab, he whispered against her lips, breathing irregular. If you want to stop, we'll stop. Just say the word and I— Don't stop, she interrupted, eyes dark with desire. Please, don't stop. Christian pulled her completely into his lap, and Gabriella wrapped her legs around his waist, feeling the solidity of his body against hers. He kissed the corner of her mouth, the line of her jaw, descending down her neck in kisses that made her entire body tremble. You're so beautiful, he murmured against her skin. I forgot what it's like to have you like this so close. His hands slid beneath her dress, over her hips, her thighs, touching bare skin with a reverence that made Gabriella arch against him. Christian, she moaned, burying her face in his neck, breathing in his scent, that scent that made her feel at home. He held her tighter, standing up from the couch with her still wrapped around him. Gabriella clung to him as Christian walked toward the bedroom, each step deliberate, eyes never leaving hers. When they reached the bedroom, he laid her on the bed with such gentleness he might have been depositing something precious. And perhaps he was. He knelt on the bed beside her, just watching, as if memorizing every detail. I thought about you every night, he confessed, voice hoarse. In this bed, in this room, everywhere in this house. I couldn't escape you. Gabriella reached out, touching his face, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingers. Then why did you let me go? The question came out before she could contain it. Christian covered her hand with his, turning his face to kiss her palm. Because I thought you deserved more than what I was giving you. And you did. But Gab, he leaned over her, supporting himself on his elbows, his body covering hers. I want to be the man who gives you everything. I want to be worthy of you again. You were always worthy, she whispered, eyes shining with tears. You just forgot to be present. He kissed the tears running down her cheeks, soft and salty kisses that said more than words ever could. I'm here now, he promised. Completely here, completely yours. And then he kissed her again, slowly, deeply, as if they had all the time in the world. His hands found the zipper at the back of her dress, lowering it slowly, revealing soft skin inch by inch. Gabriella arched against him, her hands undoing the buttons of his shirt, impatient to feel his skin against hers. When she finally succeeded, she ran her hands over his defined chest, feeling the muscles contract beneath her touch. Christian removed the dress completely, tossing it aside carelessly, eyes darkening as he saw her body illuminated only by the soft light coming through the window. Perfect, he murmured. You're absolutely perfect. He kissed his way down her neck over her shoulders, descending slowly, savoring every inch of skin, while his hands explored, rediscovering curves he knew so well, but that seemed new under this touch charged with emotion. Gabriella closed her eyes, surrendering completely to the sensations, his weight on her, the warmth of his mouth against her skin, the way his hands trembled slightly, as if he were trying to control himself. Look at me, Christian asked. And when she opened her eyes, she saw an intensity in his gaze that left her breathless. I want you to see who's touching you, who's loving you. I want you to know it's only you, Gab. It's always been only you. And then he loved her with an intensity that made her forget everything. The pain, the separation, the lonely nights. There was only them, bodies moving in perfect synchrony, sighs and whispers filling the silence, hands intertwined as if never wanting to let go. When they finally reached climax together, Gabriella felt tears stream down her face, not from sadness, but from something deeper. Relief, forgiveness, hope. Christian held her afterward, pulling her to his chest, fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. Stay, he whispered against her hair. Just tonight. Just stay with me. Gabriella knew she should go back to the loft, knew this complicated everything. But in that moment, wrapped in his warmth, listening to his heartbeat beneath her ear, She didn't want to be anywhere else. Just tonight, she agreed. And while the city outside continued its nightlife, there in that room, two broken hearts began, very slowly, to find their way back to each other. The dim light of the bedroom enveloped them both like a protective blanket, hiding them from the world outside. Christian kissed Gabriella with restrained urgency, like someone who finds their own home after wandering lost for too long. Each touch was a silent declaration, each kiss an unspoken promise. He slid his hands down her arms, intertwining his fingers with hers and raising them above her head, gently pressing them against the pillow. The position was intimate, vulnerable, and Gabriella felt her heart race when his eyes devoured her. Dark with desire, but soft with tenderness. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, voice hoarse and loaded with emotion. "How could I have been so blind?" Gabriella freed one of her hands and touched his face, her thumb tracing the contour of his lips. "You're seeing now," she whispered. "That's what matters." Christian leaned in, capturing her lips in a deep kiss that made her moan. He released her hands, allowing them to explore his body freely. Gabriella ran her nails lightly down his back, feeling the muscles contract beneath her touch, drawing a low sound from his throat that reverberated through her body. His hands slid along the side of her body, memorizing every curve, every inch of skin he'd neglected for so long. When he reached her waist, he held her firmly, fingers pressing into soft skin, and pulled her closer, eliminating any space between their bodies. "I thought about you every night," he whispered against her neck, his mouth tracing a path of hot kisses. "I'd wake up in the middle of the night and reach out expecting to find you, but you weren't there. And it hurt, Gab. It hurt in a way I didn't know was possible. I missed you too," she admitted, voice trembling. "Even when I was angry, even when I swore I was over it, my body still searched for yours." He lifted his head, looking deep into her eyes. There were tears glistening in his brown eyes, threatening to fall. "Then why did you let me go?" The question echoed hers from earlier, but now with raw vulnerability. Gabriella touched his face with both hands, forcing him to hold her gaze. "Because loving you was killing me," she said with brutal honesty. "And I needed to survive, even if it meant living without you." A tear finally escaped, sliding down his face. Gabriella wiped it away with her thumb, and then pulled him into a kiss that was half pain, half healing. Christian wrapped her in his arms, holding her as if she might disappear at any moment. He rolled, bringing her on top of him, allowing her to have control. Gabriella sat up, hands flat on his chest, feeling his racing heart beneath her palms. "I see you," he said, hands sliding over her thighs, her waist, leaving trails of fire wherever they passed. "I see you now, Gab, and you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." She leaned down, kissing him deeply while their bodies moved together in an ancient and familiar rhythm, but somehow completely new. There was urgency there, but also reverence. Need, but also tenderness. Christian sat up, bringing her into his lap, their bodies still joined, allowing them to be even closer. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in her scent, lavender and vanilla, the smell of home. "Don't leave again," he pleaded, voice broken. "Please, Gab, don't leave me again." Gabriella held his face, forcing him to look at her. There were tears running down her face now too, but she smiled through them. "I don't want to leave," she admitted. "I never wanted to. I just wanted you to make me want to stay." "I will," he promised, kissing her face, her tears, her lips. "Every day, Gab. I'll give you reasons to stay. I'll make you remember why we fell in love. She silenced him with a kiss, deep and desperate, and then they lost themselves in each other again. Their bodies moved in perfect synchrony, as if they'd never forgotten the steps of this intimate dance. Hands explored with urgency and gentleness, whispers and sighs filling the silence of the room. When the intensity took them to the edge, they clung to each other, names murmured like prayers, like promises, like pleas. And when they finally crossed that line together, it was as if all the broken pieces inside them began, finally, to fit back together. Gabriella collapsed on his chest, exhausted and satisfied, heart still beating erratically. Christian held her tightly, arms around her like a protective shield against the world. They stayed like that for long moments, just breathing, just feeling. Then Christian rolled to his side, pulling her with him, positioning her facing him. He brushed away the strands of hair stuck to her face, fingers trembling slightly. "I love you," he said, and this time there was no hesitation, no doubt. "I love you so much it hurts, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you, if you let me." Gabriella felt new tears burn but didn't hold them back. She touched his face, memorizing every line, every imperfection, every detail of the man she never really stopped loving. "I love you too," she whispered. "I never stopped. Even when I wanted to, even when I tried, you were always here." She placed her hand over her own heart. Christian took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing each finger, each knuckle, as if sealing an oath. "Then stay," he asked once more. "Not just today, tomorrow too, and the day after, and every day after that." Gabriella closed her eyes, fighting against the fear that still resided somewhere inside her. But when she opened them again and saw the raw vulnerability in his gaze, the fragile hope mixed with desperate love, she knew there was no more running away. "Only if you promise one thing," she said. "Anything. Promise you'll stay too. Not just with your body, but with your heart. Promise you'll be present, that you'll see me, that you'll make me feel like I matter." "I promise," he answered without hesitation, pressing his forehead against hers. "I promise, Gab. You're the most important thing in my life. I just had to lose you to realize it." She smiled through her tears and pulled him into another kiss, this one softer, slower, loaded with renewed hope. Afterward, lying together, Christian pulled the sheets over them and brought her to his chest. Gabriella laid her head on his shoulder, hand resting over his heart, feeling each steady, strong beat. "I didn't know that missing someone could feel good too," she murmured, eyes already heavy with sleep. Christian kissed the top of her head, arms tightening her against him. "Only when it ends like this," he replied softly, and while the city outside began to wake with the first rays of sun, there in that room, two hearts that had been broken began to beat in the same rhythm again. Everything wasn't fixed. There were conversations to be had, trust to be rebuilt, wounds to be healed. But for the first time in months, both believed that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to start over, a chance to get it right this time, a chance to prove that love, when it's real, always finds a way back home. And for Gabriella and Christian, home was wherever they were together. Gabriella woke slowly, as if emerging from a deep dream. There was something different, a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. It took a few seconds to realize where she was, in the bed that was once hers, in sheets that still carried the familiar smell of home. And then she felt the arm around her waist. "Christian." She turned her head slightly and found him still sleeping. His face relaxed in a way she rarely saw when he was awake. The tension lines around his eyes had softened. His jaw was no longer tight. He looked younger like this, more like the man she'd married. Gabriella allowed herself just to watch him for a few moments, memorizing the details, the dark lashes against his cheeks, the way his hair fell over his forehead, the curve of the lips that had kissed every inch of her the night before. As if sensing the weight of her gaze, Christian began to wake. His eyes opened slowly, still clouded with sleep, and when they focused on her, a soft, genuine smile appeared on his face. "Good morning," he murmured, voice hoarse with sleep, and the sound made something inside her warm. "Good morning," she replied, feeling her cheeks flush slightly. He pulled her closer, burying his face in her neck and leaving a soft kiss there. "You're here," he said, as if needing to confirm it wasn't a dream. "You're really here." "I am," she confirmed, running her fingers through his hair. Christian lifted his head, eyes seeking hers. "How do you feel?" It was a simple question, but loaded with meaning. How did she feel? Confused? Definitely. Scared? A little? Regretful? No. "I feel good," she admitted, surprising herself. "Better than I expected." The smile that lit up his face was devastating in its raw beauty. "Stay in bed," he said, kissing her forehead before getting up. "I'll make coffee." Gabriella sat up, pulling the sheet to cover herself, and watched as he put on sweatpants that hung low on his hips, leaving his defined torso completely bare. He grabbed a t-shirt, but before putting it on he picked up another, one of his that she always stole, and tossed it to her with a mischievous smile. "So you don't have to wear last night's dress," he said. Gabriella caught the shirt and pressed it against her face for a moment, inhaling his scent embedded in the fabric. When she put it on, the material fell large on her body, reaching mid-thigh, and she felt strangely at home. Christian watched her for a long moment, something indecipherable crossing his face. "You have no idea how much I missed this," he said softly. "Seeing you wear my clothes, waking up with you, knowing you were here." "Christian." "I know," he interrupted, raising his hand. "We don't need to talk about it now. I'll make coffee. Come down when you want." And then he left the room, leaving Gabriella alone with her thoughts. She got up slowly, walking to the window. The city was waking up outside, cars honking, people rushing to work, life happening as it always did. But in here, something had changed. Gabriella picked up her phone and saw several messages from Sarah, her friend from Brooklyn, asking if everything was okay, if she needed anything. She typed a quick response. "I'm fine, I'll call you later," and then put the phone aside. When she finally went down to the kitchen, what she found made her stop in the doorway. Christian had his back turned, shirtless, whistling softly as he made coffee. There were pancakes on the griddle, bacon frying in another pan, and he was completely focused, as if making breakfast was the most important thing in the world. Gabriella leaned against the doorframe, just watching. There was something deeply intimate about that moment, seeing him do something so ordinary, so domestic, with so much care. As if sensing her presence, Christian looked over his shoulder and smiled. "Hey, I thought you were still sleeping." "I couldn't resist the smell," she replied, entering the kitchen. He poured a cup of coffee, adding sugar exactly the way she liked it, 2 spoons, no cream, and handed it to her. When their fingers touched, both felt the electricity run through them, but this time it wasn't charged with sexual tension. It was something softer, more comforting. "Pancakes?" he offered, turning back to the stove. "Since when do you know how to make pancakes?" "Since I discovered that sitting alone in this kitchen was driving me crazy," he admitted, flipping one of the pancakes with surprising skill. "So I started learning. Burned a lot before I got it right." Gabriella sat on one of the island stools watching him work. There was a grace to his movements she didn't expect, the way he tested the griddle temperature, how he flipped the pancakes at just the right moment, how he seasoned the bacon. "You've changed," she said softly. He paused, looking at her. "I had to change. Losing you forced me to look in the mirror and not like what I saw." "And what did you see?" Christian turned off the stove and turned completely toward her, leaning against the counter. "I saw a man who had everything and let it slip away because he was too busy chasing things that didn't matter. I saw someone who prioritized meetings over the person he loved. I saw a coward who was afraid to be vulnerable, to admit he needed help, to say he was drowning." Gabriella felt her chest tighten. She put her cup aside and stood up, walking over to him. When she was close enough, she took his hand. "You're not a coward," she said firmly. "You were lost. There's a difference. And now you're trying to find yourself again. And that's brave, Christian." He pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her hair, and they stayed like that for long moments, just holding each other, just being present. When they finally separated, Christian served breakfast. They sat at the table, that same table that had witnessed so many lonely dinners. And this time there was laughter, there was conversation, there was life. "Remember when I tried to make pancakes for the first time?" Gabriella asked, smiling at him over her coffee cup. "And they came out more like cookies?" Christian laughed. "And you got so frustrated you threw the batter out and we ordered pizza for breakfast." "Pizza is a valid option for all meals. I'm not going to argue with that." They laughed, and it was a light, genuine sound that filled the house in a way she didn't remember hearing in a long time. After breakfast, Christian started washing the dishes, but Gabriella stopped him. "Let me help," she said, grabbing a towel. They washed the dishes side by side, in a comfortable silence that didn't need to be filled with words. Occasionally, their shoulders touched, or their hands brushed, and each touch was a reminder that they were there, together, trying. When they finished, Christian turned to her, hands still damp with water. "Stay a little longer?" he asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that made her heart squeeze. Gabriella knew she should go back to the loft. Knew she had commitments, art classes, a life she'd built away from here. But looking at him, seeing the fragile hope in his brown eyes, she couldn't say no. "Only if you make those pancakes you always used to burn," she replied with a smile. Christian laughed, and it was a joyful sound, full of relief. "I think I can do that," he said, pulling her into another hug. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other in the kitchen bathed in golden morning light, both felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Hope that the love they'd built wasn't lost, just dormant, waiting to be awakened again. Hope that mornings could always smell like this. Fresh coffee, pancakes on the stove, and the person you love by your side. And for now, that hope was enough. The following days were a delicate dance between the past and the future. Gabriella didn't move back immediately. She kept the Brooklyn loft as a reminder that she had her own life, her own identity outside the marriage. But she began spending more time at the penthouse, arriving for dinners that Christian prepared with growing skill, staying for conversations that stretched into the early morning hours. It was different now. They talked, really talked, about things they'd avoided for so long, about fears, insecurities, unmet expectations, about how Christian's work had become a shield against vulnerability, and how Gabriella had become invisible, trying not to be a burden. One Saturday afternoon, Christian showed up at her loft unannounced. When Gabriella opened the door, he stood there with a determined expression and 2 cups of coffee. "Can I come in?" he asked, and there was nervousness in his voice. Gabriella stepped aside, allowing him to enter. It was the first time Christian had seen where she'd been living, and she watched as he looked around, the canvases leaning against the wall, the brushes organized by size, the fresh flowers on the kitchen table. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "It feels very much like you." She accepted the coffee he offered and sat on the couch. Christian sat beside her but maintained a respectful distance. "I've been thinking," he began, looking at his own cup. "We need to set boundaries, expectations. I don't want us to fall back into the same patterns that destroyed us." Gabriella felt her chest warm at his seriousness. "What do you have in mind?" Christian finally looked at her, and there was determination in his brown eyes. "I want couples therapy. I want us to learn to communicate better, to express needs without fear of judgment. I want—" He paused, his voice becoming softer. "I want to prioritize you, Gab. Really this time." "How?" "No work after 7 at night unless absolutely necessary. Dinners together at least 4 times a week. Weekends are ours. No emails, no calls, just the 2 of us." He took her hand. "And if I travel, you come with me when you can. I want you to see that I'm not hiding you, that you're part of my life in every way." Gabriella felt tears burn in her eyes. These were promises she'd silently begged for so long. "And if you can't keep them, then you call me out. You remind me. And if I keep failing," he took a deep breath, "then I deserve for you to leave again. Because I won't trap you in a marriage where you're not happy." She squeezed his hand. "I have conditions too," she said. "Tell me." "I'm not giving up my space here, at least not yet. I need to know I'm capable of being alone before I choose to be with you. And you need to understand that I have my own life now. Art classes, friends, interests. I'm not going to be the wife who waits at home while you live your life. I don't want that," he replied quickly. "I want you to be happy, with or without me. I just hope that eventually, your happiness includes me by your side." Gabriella smiled through her tears and leaned in to kiss him, soft and slow. "Then let's try," she whispered against his lips. "Let's really try this time." The following weeks were a mix of discoveries and challenges. Couples therapy revealed wounds neither of them knew existed. Christian's fear of abandonment because of his parents' early death. Gabriella's need for constant validation from growing up feeling neglected by her family. There were arguments. There were moments when Gabriella almost gave up, when the fear of being hurt again threatened to suffocate hope. There were nights when Christian called asking to postpone a dinner because of a meeting, and Gabriella's old anger resurfaced. But the difference was that now they talked about it. They fought, yes, but they fought constructively, listening to each other, trying to understand instead of just winning the argument. One night, after a particularly intense argument about Christian forgetting a therapy appointment, Gabriella grabbed her things to go back to the loft. Christian followed her to the door, panic evident on his face. "Don't go," he pleaded. "Please, we can talk about this." "I can't do this if you're not committed," she replied, voice firm despite the tears. "I can't be the only one fighting for us." "You're not," he insisted, blocking the door. "Gab, I forgot because I had a crisis at work. I should have called, I know. But it's not because you're not important. It's because I'm still learning to balance everything." She stared at him, seeing sincerity mixed with desperation. "Then show me you're learning," she said. "Show me I'm not just a priority when it's convenient." Christian nodded, grabbing his phone. Gabriella watched as he sent a message to his secretary, rescheduling all of the next day's meetings. "Tomorrow is yours," he said, showing her the phone. "No work. Just you and me. We'll do whatever you want." Gabriella felt her anger begin to dissipate. She dropped her bag and moved closer to him. "I don't want grand gestures, Christian. I just want consistency. I want to know that when you promise to be present, you really will be." "I will," he promised, pulling her into a tight hug. "I swear I will, Gab." And he kept his word. Slowly, but consistently, Christian began to show up. Not just physically, but emotionally. He started asking questions about her day, really listening to the answers. He left notes on the fridge when he left early. He sent photos during the day, silly things that made him think of her. One afternoon, Gabriella was painting in the penthouse studio. Yes, she'd started using the space again when Christian came home early. He approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Can I see?" he asked. She hesitated. Her paintings had always been something private, vulnerable, but then she took a deep breath and stepped aside, allowing him to see. The canvas showed two birds, one flying away, the other trying to reach it, but both connected by a golden thread that glowed even at a distance. Christian was silent for a long moment, just observing. "It's us," he finally said, voice hoarse. "Even separated, still connected. We always were," she admitted. "I just needed distance to see it." He turned her to face him, hands framing her face. "I don't want you to fly away again," he said. "I want us to fly together, in the same direction, toward the same future." Gabriella smiled, eyes shining. "Then let's fly together." And he kissed her there, among painted canvases and forgotten brushes, with her paint-stained hands leaving marks on his white shirt. And neither of them cared because finally, they were building something real. It wasn't perfect. There were still stumbles, still fears. But there were also laughs in the kitchen when he burned dinner. There were hand-in-hand walks through Central Park. There were nights watching movies curled up on the couch. There were kisses in the rain, because Christian pulled her outside when it started raining, saying he'd read it was romantic. There was life, there was love, there was hope. And one night when they were lying in bed after making love, Christian held her hand under the soft moonlight coming through the window. "If you want," he said, voice hesitant. "We could get married again, start from scratch, do things right this time." Gabriella turned her head to look at him, heart squeezing at the vulnerability on his face. "I never took off the ring from my soul," she whispered. And Christian smiled. That smile that lit up his entire face, that reminded her why she fell in love with him in the first place. "Neither did I," he replied, intertwining his fingers with hers. And that night, under the glow of the moon and the weight of renewed promises, two hearts that had been lost finally found their way back home to each other. 6 months after that rainy night when Gabriella handed him the divorce papers, she stood in front of the bedroom mirror, adjusting the white dress she'd chosen. It wasn't a traditional wedding dress. It was simpler, lighter, with a flowing cut that danced around her legs when she moved. Small, delicate flowers were woven into the loose hair that fell in soft waves down her back. Sarah stood beside her, adjusting the discreet veil. "Are you sure?" her friend asked softly. "Not that I think it's a bad idea, but are you sure?" Gabriella looked at her own reflection. The woman looking back was different from the one who'd left this house months ago. There was strength in her eyes now, but also softness. There was healing, but also love. "I am," she replied with conviction. "I'm not going back to the man who neglected me. I'm choosing the man who learned, who grew, who fights every day to be better. I'm choosing us, the version of us we're building together." Sarah smiled and hugged her friend. "Then let's get you married again." The garden was transformed into a fairy tale. Warm lights hung from the trees, creating a magical atmosphere as the sun began to set. There were few people, only their closest friends and family, because this time it wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about them. Christian stood at the makeshift altar, wearing a navy blue suit that fit his body perfectly. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, and he ran them through his hair nervously. Their couple's therapist, who had become a friend and agreed to officiate the ceremony, smiled encouragingly at him. "Breathe," he said softly. "She's going to show up." And then the music began, something soft and instrumental played by a violinist they'd hired. People stood, turning to see Gabriella appear at the end of the rose-petal path. When Christian saw her, the world seemed to stop. She was radiant, the white dress billowing as it caught the last rays of sun, the flowers in her hair making her look like a vision from a dream. But what really took his breath away was the smile. That smile that lit up her entire face, that said more than words ever could. She was happy. Genuinely, completely happy. Gabriella walked slowly down the aisle, unhurried, savoring each step. When she finally reached him, Christian had to blink several times to hold back the tears threatening to fall. "Hi," she whispered, eyes shining. "Hi," he replied, voice choked. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The therapist cleared his throat, smiling. "Well, let's start before the groom collapses in tears." Soft laughter rippled through the guests, and the ceremony began. But it wasn't like the first time. There were no traditional vows, no generic promises. This time they'd written their own vows, raw, honest words that came directly from the heart. Christian held her hands, taking a deep breath before beginning. "Gabriella, I'm standing here today not because things were easy, but because they were hard. Because you showed me that true love isn't about perfection, but about choosing to show up every day, even when it's difficult." His voice trembled. "I lost you once because I forgot that having you by my side was a privilege, not a right. And I promise every day for the rest of my life to remind you and remind myself that you're the most important thing, that we are the most important thing. I promise to see you, hear you, choose you, always." Tears flowed freely down Gabriella's face now, and she didn't try to stop them. When her turn came, she squeezed his hands and looked deep into the brown eyes she loved so much. "Christian, you broke me, and then you gave me space to put myself back together on my own. And when I came back, you were different. You were trying." She smiled through her tears. "I learned that loving you doesn't mean losing myself in you. It means finding a way to grow together while keeping our own identities. I promise to never stop communicating my needs. I promise to fight for us even when it's easier to give up. And I promise to remind you every day that you're enough, that we are enough." There wasn't a dry eye among the guests. Even the therapist had to pause to compose himself before continuing. "The rings," he finally said. Christian picked up the ring, the same one Gabriella had worn for 3 years, but which was now being returned with new meaning. He slid it onto her finger slowly, reverently. "With this ring, I renew my commitment, not just to be your husband, but to be your partner, your best friend, your safe harbor." Gabriella picked up his ring, and when she slid it onto his finger, her hands trembled slightly with emotion. "With this ring, I choose you, today and every day to come. Then, by the power vested in me by the state of New York and, more importantly, by the power of the love you two have for each other," the therapist smiled broadly, "I pronounce you once again husband and wife. Christian, you may kiss your bride." Christian didn't need to be told twice. He pulled Gabriella into his arms and kissed her with an intensity that made the guests erupt in applause and whistles. It was a kiss that contained everything: pain, forgiveness, hope, love, promise of a future. When they finally separated, both were laughing through their tears. "I love you," he said, pressing his forehead against hers. "I love you too," she replied. "I always have. I always will." The reception was intimate and joyful. There was music, dancing, delicious food prepared by a chef Christian had hired. But the best moment of the night came when it was time for the first dance. The DJ played a slow, soft song, and Christian guided Gabriella to the center of the makeshift dance floor. He held her close, one hand on the curve of her back, the other intertwined with hers. "Do you remember the first time we danced?" he asked as they moved softly. "At the original wedding?" She smiled. "You stepped on my foot 3 times. I was nervous," he admitted, laughing softly. "I couldn't believe you'd said yes. And now?" Christian spun her slowly before pulling her back close. "Now I can't believe you said yes again, that you gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve it." Gabriella laid her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You deserved it," she said softly. "Because you changed. Because you tried. Because you showed me it was possible." He held her tighter and they continued dancing, lost in each other, while the world around them disappeared. As the music began to end, Christian leaned in, lips brushing her ear. "I won't forget what matters anymore," he whispered. Gabriella lifted her head, looking into his eyes with all the love she felt. "And what matters? You," he replied without hesitation. "Us. Every day." And then he kissed her again, softly, while the guests applauded and the moon began to rise in the starry sky. Later that night, when everyone had gone and it was just the two of them, Christian and Gabriella stood in the garden, watching the lights still glowing in the trees. "It's strange," Gabriella said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Starting over with the same person. It's like we're different, but still us." "We're better," Christian corrected, kissing the top of her head. "We're the version of us that learned from our mistakes, that grew from the pain. Do you think it'll work this time?" He thought for a moment before answering. "I think there are no guarantees. But I know that this time, we're both going to fight for it. And that makes all the difference." Gabriella smiled and turned in his arms, interlacing her hands behind his neck. "Then let's go home, husband." Christian smiled in that way that made her melt. "Let's go home, wife." And hand in hand, under the glow of the stars and the weight of renewed promises, they walked back inside, not to the life they had before, but to the life they were building together. A life where love wasn't taken for granted, but actively chosen every day. A life where mistakes were forgiven and lessons were learned. A life where they danced under the stars and made pancakes on Sunday mornings. A life that smelled of new beginnings, of hope, of forever. And this time, they knew that forever wasn't an easy promise. It was a daily commitment, a constant choice, a labor of love. But it was worth it. They were worth it. And as they closed the door behind them, beginning the first day of the rest of their lives together, both knew deep in their hearts, this was the version of love that would last. Because it was real, it was earned, it was chosen. And there was nothing more beautiful than that. Gabriella and Christian proved that true love isn't about never falling. It's about choosing to get up together. They lost each other in silence, found each other in pain, and rebuilt themselves in vulnerability. They learned that a marriage doesn't survive just on promises made at the altar, but on daily choices, constant presence, difficult conversations, and genuine embraces. Sometimes you need to fall apart completely to discover how to fit together again. And when love is real, it always finds a way back home. Because in the end, it's not about never making mistakes. It's about never giving up on trying. And you? Are you fighting for the love you deserve, or just surviving what you have? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, click the super thanks button too. Your support makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing you stories that move you.